July 30th, 1864, 7:30 a.m. The crater Petersburg, Virginia. Private George Washington, 23 years old, formerly enslaved, now serving with the 43rd United States Colored Troops, raises his hands above his head. His regiment has been fighting for 2 hours in a smoking pit of death. Ammunition's gone, officers dead. Nowhere to run. Confederate soldiers surround the crater's rim, muskets aimed down. "We surrender!" Washington shouts, arms high. "Don't shoot, we surrender!" The Confederate soldier closest to him, a Virginia farm boy, maybe 19 years old, levels his musket at Washington's chest. For a moment, their eyes meet. Then a voice from behind the Confederate line yells, "No quarter for Nas! Give them hell!" The musket fires. Private Washington falls, not dead yet. A Confederate officer walks up, looks down at him struggling to breathe, and shoots him again. Point blank. In the head. This happened. Not in one isolated incident, but systematically for hours, witnessed by hundreds of soldiers on both sides. Confederate troops executed surrendering black Union soldiers at the crater, bayoneting wounded men, shooting prisoners, burying some alive. Estimates range from 200 to 300 murdered after trying to surrender. It was a war crime, and for 150 years it was downplayed, sanitized, and erased from our history books. This is the story of what really happened at the crater, why it happened, and how the truth was buried almost as deep as those Pennsylvania coal miners dug. If you want the unfiltered truth about Civil War history, no lost cause mythology, no sanitized versions, subscribe and hit that like button. We're going where textbooks won't. Let's start with the brilliant plan that turned into America's darkest battlefield atrocity, June 1864. The siege of Petersburg had settled into a miserable stalemate. Grant's massive army surrounded Lee's Confederates, but Lee's fortifications were too strong for frontal assault. Trenches, artillery positions, sharpshooters. It was World War I 50 years early. Then Lieutenant Colonel Henry Pleasants of the 48th Pennsylvania Infantry had an idea. Pleasants had been a mining engineer before the war. His regiment was filled with Pennsylvania coal miners, men who spent their lives underground. Looking at the Confederate position called Elliott's Salient, a fort jutting out toward Union lines just 500 feet away, Pleasants saw an opportunity. "We could tunnel under it," he told his division commander Ambrose Burnside. "Dig a mine shaft, pack it with explosives, blow the whole fort to kingdom come, create a gap, break through." Burnside loved it. He brought it to Meade and Grant. Meade was skeptical. "It'll never work, and if it does work, the men will get slaughtered going through." Grant, always willing to try something aggressive, approved. "Let them try. If it works, we might end this siege." June 25th, the 48th Pennsylvania started digging. The engineering feat was remarkable. Working in shifts, the miners excavated a shaft 511 feet long, angling slightly upward to end directly beneath the Confederate fort. No drilling equipment, just picks, shovels, and wooden supports. Dirt hauled out in cracker boxes and disposed of secretly so Confederates wouldn't notice. Ventilation was the challenge. Pleasants designed an ingenious system, a sealed tunnel with a fire at one end, drawing fresh air through a wooden pipe. Crude, but it worked. For 5 weeks, men dug in near darkness, in stifling heat, knowing the whole thing could collapse and bury them alive at any moment. One miner later wrote, "Every shovel felt like it might trigger a cave-in. We were betting our lives that Pleasance's math was right. But we kept digging because we believed, really believed, this could end the war." By July 23rd, the tunnel was complete. The chamber beneath Elliott's Salient was packed with 8,000 pounds of black powder in 320 kegs. The fuse was laid. They were ready. Now came the question. Who leads the assault? This is where the story gets complicated, and where you see the politics of 1864 intersecting with military reality. Ambrose Burnside commanded 9th Corps, which included the 4th Division, entirely United States Colored Troops, USCT. About 4,300 black soldiers, many formerly enslaved, many from Virginia and Maryland. They'd been training specifically for this assault for weeks. Brigadier General Edward Ferrero commanded the division. He drilled his men relentlessly on the plan. When the mine explodes, don't go into the crater. Split left and right, sweep around it, attack the Confederate rear positions, break through to Petersburg. The USCT troops were ready. More than ready, they were desperate to prove themselves. But soldiers faced unique pressures in 1864. Every battle was a referendum on black capability, on the righteousness of emancipation, on their very humanity. They fought knowing that failure would be used against their entire race. Private Thomas Cole, 28th USCT, wrote to his wife, "When we go in that breach, we are fighting for more than the Union. We are fighting to prove we deserve freedom. We are fighting so our children will never be slaves." But on July 29th, one day before the attack, Meade and Grant changed the plan. They ordered Burnside to put white divisions in front. The USCT division would be held in reserve. Why? The official reason in Meade's order: in case of failure, the implications of using colored troops in the lead would be problematic. Translation: if the attack failed and black troops led it, newspapers would blame Lincoln for sacrificing Negro soldiers, giving ammunition to Democrats in the upcoming election. Burnside protested furiously. His white divisions hadn't trained for this. The black troops were ready, motivated, and rehearsed. Meade was firm. Grant backed him up. Political optics trumped military readiness. Burnside had to choose which white division would lead. He couldn't decide. All three were equally unprepared, so he had his division commanders draw straws. Brigadier General James Ledley's 1st Division won. Ledley was a disaster. He was likely an alcoholic, certainly a coward, and absolutely the wrong man for this job. But he drew the short straw, so his 5,000 men would lead. The USCT troops, who'd trained for weeks, would wait in reserve. On the evening of July 29th, Ferrero gathered his black soldiers. He told them about the change. The disappointment was crushing. Sergeant Decatur Dorsey, 39th USCT, recorded, "We had prepared to show the world what black soldiers could do. Instead, we would watch white soldiers do what we'd been training for. But we were soldiers. We would obey orders and pray for their success. What none of them knew yet, by the next day those orders would doom them to a massacre." 4:44 a.m., July 30th. The fuse was lit at 3:15 a.m. It should have detonated at 3:30. But the fuse failed part-way through. Two volunteers, Sergeant Henry Reese and Lieutenant Jacob Doty, crawled into the tunnel, found the break, spliced it, relit it, and got out. 4:44 a.m. the world exploded. 8,000 pounds of gunpowder detonated 20 feet below Elliott's salient. The explosion was heard in Richmond, 23 miles away. Union soldiers 3 miles from Petersburg felt the ground shake. A Union artillery officer described it. The earth rose like a volcano. Timber, cannons, men, all lifted into the air in a column of smoke and debris 300 feet high. When it settled, there was a crater where the fort used to be, 170 feet long, 60 feet wide, 30 feet deep. The Confederate fort and the 278 South Carolina soldiers manning it simply ceased to exist. Some were vaporized, others were buried alive in the debris. A few, miraculously, were blown clear and survived, stunned and deafened. The Confederate line had a 300-yard gap. Nothing between Union forces and Petersburg but shocked, disorganized defenders. For 10 minutes there was silence. Confederates on both sides of the crater stood frozen, staring at the smoking pit. Union soldiers stared too, awed by the destruction. Then Ledley's division was supposed to attack. But Ledley wasn't there. He was in a bomb-proof shelter 400 yards behind the lines, drinking rum from a medical brandy bottle. His brigade commanders had no clear orders except advance. At 5 a.m., Union troops finally moved. And they did exactly what Ferrero's USCT division had been trained not to do. They went into the crater. Why did they go into the crater? Partly curiosity. Partly the path of least resistance. The crater offered cover from Confederate fire. Partly no one told them otherwise. 5,000 Union soldiers poured into a smoking pit of loose dirt, debris, and buried bodies. Officers tried to maintain order, but it was chaos. The crater's walls were steep, crumbling. Men struggled to climb out the far side. Meanwhile, more troops kept piling in from behind. One New York soldier. It was like being in a sandpit. Every step, you'd sink. There were bodies buried in the dirt. You'd step on a hand, a leg. The heat was suffocating, and we couldn't get out. Confederate commanders, stunned at first, recovered quickly. Brigadier General William Mahone, one of Lee's best division commanders, rallied troops from 3 brigades. By 5:30 a.m., Confederate artillery from both flanks opened fire into the crater. It became a shooting gallery, Union soldiers packed tight in a bowl-shaped pit, Confederate guns firing down from 3 sides. Canister shot, essentially giant shotgun shells, tore through packed masses. Soldiers used dead bodies as shelter. By 6:30 a.m., Ledley's division was shattered. Dead and wounded filled the crater. Confederate infantry moved to the crater's rim, firing down at soldiers trapped below. Some Union troops tried to surrender. Confederates accepted some surrenders from white soldiers. That's when Burnside, desperate to salvage the attack, sent in Ferrero's USCT division. 7:00 a.m., 4,300 black soldiers advanced. They'd watched white divisions flounder for 2 hours. Now it was their turn, and they fought magnificently. The USCT troops didn't go into the crater. They'd been trained to go around it. They swept past the crater's flanks, attacking Confederate positions, capturing trenches, pushing toward the ridge beyond. For 30 minutes, it looked like they might succeed. Colonel Henry Thomas's brigade reached the crest, the farthest penetration of the day. They engaged Confederate reserves in hand-to-hand combat, bayonets, clubbed muskets, desperate fighting, but they were too few, and they were alone. The white divisions were still trapped in the crater. Reinforcements didn't come. And Mahone's Confederates, particularly his Virginia brigades, counterattacked with fury. This is where it turned from battle to atrocity. Mahone's men were Virginians, many from the areas where these black soldiers had been enslaved. They weren't just fighting enemy soldiers. They were fighting formerly enslaved people who'd taken up arms against their former masters. As USCT troops fell back toward the crater, some tried to surrender. Confederate soldiers, especially from Mahone's Virginia brigades, weren't taking prisoners. Captain H. Seymour Hall, white officer with the 43rd USCT, witnessed. The rebels yelled, "No quarter! Kill them!" They bayoneted wounded men as they lay on the ground. I saw a colored soldier on his knees, hands raised, begging for mercy. A rebel officer walked up and shot him in the face. Private Edward Whitfield, a Confederate soldier from Virginia, later admitted in his diary, "We gave them no quarter. Our boys were shooting them down like dogs. Some tried to surrender. We didn't let them. I'm not proud of it, but that's what happened." The fighting condensed back into the crater. Now it was white soldiers and black soldiers packed together, surrounded, Confederate soldiers firing down from all sides. And the USCT troops faced something white prisoners didn't: systematic execution. What happened next is documented in official reports, court testimony, personal letters, and diaries from both sides. For decades, this evidence was ignored or dismissed. But it's there, and it's consistent. Confederate soldiers systematically murdered black Union soldiers trying to surrender. Sergeant Major Christian Fleetwood, 4th USCT, Medal of Honor recipient, testified afterward, "I saw rebel soldiers pull wounded colored men from the crater and bayonet them. I saw prisoners lined up and shot. When white soldiers tried to intervene, rebels told them, 'This doesn't concern you.' It was murder, plain and simple." Captain Charles Francis Adams, Jr., grandson of John Quincy Adams, commanding Union cavalry, observed from a distance with field glasses, "I watched through my glass as rebel soldiers pulled Negro soldiers from the crater singly and in groups, and deliberately shot them dead. This went on for over an hour. It was the most repulsive thing I have ever seen. Some details are almost too horrible to describe, but they need to be said. Wounded black soldiers were dragged to the crater's edge and thrown in alive, buried under dirt as Confederate soldiers shoveled. A Confederate sergeant later testified he saw an officer order black prisoners lined up and executed with revolvers at point-blank range. Some black soldiers were tortured before being killed, mutilated, beaten, then shot. Confederate soldiers who tried to accept black surrenders were sometimes overruled by officers or fellow soldiers. The number. Most historians now estimate 200–300 black soldiers were murdered after attempting to surrender or while wounded and helpless. This is distinct from the combat casualties. These were men killed after fighting had ended. Not every Confederate participated. Some officers tried to stop it. Colonel David Weisiger of Mahone's brigade reportedly accepted surrenders from black troops and protected them. But he was the exception. By noon, the battle was over. Union forces retreated, leaving the crater filled with dead and wounded. Confederate casualties, about 15,500. Union casualties, nearly 4,000, including 15,300 from the USCT division. But raw numbers don't capture what happened to the black soldiers specifically. They died at a disproportionate rate, not because they fought poorly. By all accounts, they fought better than the white divisions, but because they were specifically targeted for extermination. After the battle, both sides had reasons to downplay the massacre. The Union conducted an inquiry. The court of inquiry focused on Burnside's incompetence, Ledley's cowardice, he was drinking in the bomb-proof during the entire battle, and the tactical failures. The massacre of black troops, mentioned briefly, then dropped. Why? Political calculations again. The Lincoln administration, fighting for re-election in November 1864, didn't want to highlight atrocities against black soldiers. It might inflame racial tensions in border states, might give ammunition to Democrats calling the war a Negro crusade. So the official report blamed poor leadership, bad planning, soldiers going into the crater. The systematic executions were reduced to a footnote. Certain irregularities occurred in the treatment of colored prisoners. Irregularities, that's what they called war crimes. The Confederacy had even more reason to cover it up. Jefferson Davis's government was trying to gain European recognition. Executing prisoners, especially based on race, violated the laws of war, even by 1864 standards. Confederate reports framed it as heat of battle, or blamed individual soldiers acting without orders. Mahone's official report mentioned accepting black prisoners. Technically true. Some were taken but didn't mention the hundreds who were executed. In post-war memoirs, Confederate officers either omitted the massacre entirely or justified it. Mahone claimed black soldiers fought with savage ferocity that provoked retaliation. Others claimed black troops were incited to commit atrocities and therefore deserved no quarter. These justifications rely on a racist premise, that black soldiers weren't legitimate combatants entitled to protections of war. That premise went largely unchallenged for a century. Here's how a war crime disappears from history. Step 1. Official reports downplay it. Step 2. Post-war reconciliation emphasizes honor on both sides. Step 3. Lost cause mythology paints Confederates as gentlemanly warriors who fought by the rules. Step 4. White historians focus on white soldiers' experiences. Step 5. Black soldiers' testimony is dismissed or ignored. Step 6. By the early 1900s, the crater is remembered as a Union tactical disaster, period. The massacre? Erased. History textbooks from 1900 and 1950 covering the crater don't mention executions. They mention the mine, the explosion, the tactical failure. Some acknowledge USCT troops fought, but frame it as they fought poorly due to lack of training, an outright lie, as they'd trained more than the white divisions. Ken Burns's The Civil War documentary, 1990, mentions the crater but barely touches the massacre. Most Civil War histories, written before 2000, either omit it or give it a single sentence. Why? Because acknowledging it requires acknowledging 1. Confederate soldiers committed war crimes. 2. Racism drove those war crimes. 3. The lost cause mythology of honorable Confederates is a lie. 4. Black soldiers were victims of atrocities Northern and Southern whites wanted to forget. Only in recent decades, with historians like Bryce Suderow, Kevin Levin, and Richard Slotkin doing deep archival research, has the massacre been fully documented and acknowledged. In 2014, 150 years after the battle, the National Park Service at Petersburg finally updated its interpretation to explicitly address the massacre. The ranger talks now include eyewitness testimony. The exhibits show what happened. The Crater Massacre matters for 3 reasons. First, it reveals the stakes for black soldiers. White Union soldiers fought risking death in combat. Black Union soldiers fought risking death in combat and execution if captured. They fought anyway. 180,000 black men served in the Union Army, despite knowing Confederates might not honor surrender. That's a level of courage that deserves recognition. Second, it exposes the lie of the lost cause. The lost cause myth claims Confederates fought honorably, that slavery wasn't central to the war, that black soldiers were minor players. The crater demolishes all 3 claims. Confederates executed prisoners based purely on race. That's not honor, that's racism manifesting as war crimes. Third, it shows how history gets sanitized. The Crater Massacre had hundreds of witnesses, documented testimony, physical evidence. Yet it was erased for a century because both North and South wanted reconciliation more than truth, and truth required acknowledging racial atrocities neither side wanted to confront. We're still living with the consequences. Confederate monuments erected during the erasure period honor men who committed or condoned war crimes. History textbooks still struggling to incorporate black soldiers' experiences. Public memory still centered on white narratives. The soldiers who died at the crater, black men who fought for their freedom and their families' futures, deserve better than being a footnote labeled irregularities. Let me end with their words. The black soldiers who were there, whose testimony was ignored for 150 years. Private William H. Harrison, 28th USCT, survived the massacre. He testified in 1865, "I saw them kill colored soldiers who were trying to surrender. I saw them bayonet the wounded. I saw them laugh about it. When I tried to surrender, a rebel told me, 'We don't take prisoners like you.' I ran. Many didn't make it." Sergeant Benjamin F. Randolph, 29th USCT, who became a state senator during Reconstruction before being assassinated by the KKK. "At the crater, I learned what we were really fighting against. Not just slavery, but the belief that our lives meant nothing. We proved them wrong by fighting. They proved us right by murdering us. History will judge." Colonel Henry Goddard Thomas, white officer commanding a USCT brigade, in his official report, which was buried in War Department files for decades. "My colored troops advanced through the most devastating fire I have witnessed. They fought with skill and courage equal to any soldiers I have commanded. When they attempted to surrender, they were murdered by rebel soldiers who refused to recognize them as combatants. This was not war, this was execution based on race. It dishonors both the Confederacy and our nation's failure to prosecute those responsible. Private Thomas Cole, 28th USCT, whose letter to his wife I quoted earlier. He survived the crater. In August 1864, he wrote her again, "I am alive, many are not. The rebels gave us no quarter. They shot us down as we tried to give up. I killed 3 men before they overwhelmed us. I feel no shame for that. They would have shown me no mercy. But I feel great sorrow that America needed us to die, proving we deserve to live free." He was 24 years old. If you visit Petersburg National Battlefield today, you can walk to the crater. It's still there, though softened by 160 years. There's a walking trail, interpretive signs, ranger programs. The signs tell the story now, all of it. The brilliant mind, the botched execution, the bravery of the USCT troops. And yes, the massacre. There's a small memorial to the 43rd USCT, erected in 2008. It lists the names of the soldiers from that regiment killed that day. Not all. Records are incomplete, but as many as historians could verify. Reading those names, you're struck by how young they were, most in their 20s, some teenagers, men who'd escaped slavery, joined the army, trained for weeks for an assault they weren't allowed to lead, then fought anyway when called, and died because Confederate soldiers considered them less than human. The crater was a tactical disaster, poor planning, worse execution, unnecessary casualties. But the massacre that followed, that wasn't a tactical failure. That was a moral failure, and hiding it for 150 years was another failure. One we're still correcting. The truth is this. Confederate soldiers at the crater committed war crimes. They executed surrendering prisoners based on race. Hundreds of black soldiers were murdered after attempting to surrender, or while wounded and helpless. That's not lost cause mythology. That's not Northern propaganda. That's documented, verified, witnessed history. And it was erased, deliberately, for political convenience. For racial reconciliation that prioritized white comfort over black justice. We can't change what happened at the crater, but we can stop erasing it. We can tell the truth. We can honor the men who died there, not as footnotes, but as soldiers who fought for freedom, knowing they might not be granted the basic dignities of surrender. Private George Washington, 43rd USCT, who I described at the beginning. He's buried in a mass grave at Poplar Grove National Cemetery outside Petersburg. His name is on a headstone, but we don't know which grave is his. He's listed among 300 unknown USCT burials. He deserves better, they all do. The least we can do is tell their story. The whole story, without erasure, without sanitization. That's how we honor them. By refusing to forget what happened and why.